The Home Rule crisis in Ireland was a pivotal moment in this nation's history. It defined several paramilitary groups and set the groundwork for a lot of what would come in the next 100 years. First, we'll define Home Rule. The Oxford Dictionary defines it as the government of a colony, dependent country or region by its own citizens. Put more simply, Home Rule is when a colony, such as Ireland, gains the power to make smaller decisions from their colonial ruler, in this case England. Ireland would gain its own parliament in Dublin to manage domestic affairs such as agriculture and education, and Westminster would still handle issues like foreign policy and defence. For Irish nationalists, this was the first real step available towards self-governance and freedom. However, Unionists, specifically in Ulster, saw it as a threat towards their British identity. Ulster Unionists feared that Home Rule would break down their British identity and bring dominance of Catholic influence, famously summarised as Home Rule is Rome Rule. First, we'll look at some of the key people involved in the Home Rule crisis. John Redmond, born in Dublin September 1st, 1856, was the leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party, also known as the Irish Nationalist Party, and was devoted to achieving Home Rule in Ireland through peaceful means. Edward Carson and James Craig were working on the opposite side to John Redmond, doing everything they could to oppose Home Rule in Ireland. Edward Carson was extremely influential to the Ulster Unionists. As a barrister and politician, he quickly worked his way up to being one of the most prominent figureheads in the anti-Home Rule movement. James Craig was a wealthy industrialist and politician, who worked alongside Carson as a strategist for the Unionists. His organisational skills and fundraising built and sustained many of the Unionist parties we will talk about. These two worked very well with each other. Think of them like Batman and Robin, without the capes, unfortunately. Keep in mind almost anything happening on the Union side had one or both of these people involved. In the early 1900s, the Irish Parliamentary Party regained its strength after years of division, with John Redmond as its leader. Redmond's opportunity for Home Rule came in 1909, when the Liberal government in Westminster needed the aid of the Irish nationalists to stay in power. In return for their support, they promised to introduce Home Rule into Ireland. Before this, there were two attempts to get Home Rule through the government in 1886 and 1893, both getting through the House of Commons but were being rejected by the House of Lords. The Parliament Act 1911, passed on the 18th of August 1911, was put in place to clip the wings of the House of Lords and included a section stating that they could no longer block a bill and instead could only delay it for 2 years. This allowed the Liberal government to follow through on their promise for Home Rule. In April of 1912, another Home Rule bill was introduced and passed the House of Commons. It was put on hold by the House of Lords until 1914. This was a massive victory for Ireland and the Irish Nationalist Party, as they had successfully brought Home Rule to Ireland with a short waiting time. The Unionist response was swift when in September of 1912 the Ulster League and Covenant was signed by 200,000 Ulster men and 200,000 Ulster women signed the corresponding Women's Declaration, stating they would do everything in their power to oppose Home Rule. In their eyes, Home Rule is Rome Rule, and they believed they would not be allowed to keep their British identity if the bill passed. It was rumoured that some signed in blood, but this was later proved false. Still very dramatic. Somewhere, Shakespeare would have approved. In January 1913, the Ulster Volunteer Force was formally established as a paramilitary group to act as a direct obstacle to Home Rule. The UVF was an impressive force by the summer of 1914, with 100,000 members and plenty of guns, drills intense enough for army approval, and a very intense recruitment strategy. Speaking at a huge demonstration in Newry in the same month, Carson declared that the day Home Rule was made law, the UVF would become the Army of Ulster, under the Ulster Provisional Government. In answer to the establishment of the UVF, Southern nationalists formed the Irish National Volunteers. Apparently under the control of the respectable academic Owen MacNeill, the founding members of the INV included extreme separatists who rejected Home Rule and waited for an opportunity to stage an uprising against British rule. Violence had long been the answer many in Ireland turned to, represented by the much more secret Irish Republican Brotherhood. They agreed to join forces with the INV with the shared goal to secure and maintain the rights and liberties common to all the people of Ireland. In March of 1914, rumours began circulating between British Army officers in Ireland that they would have to move north to defend against the UVF, when in reality it was simply a troop movement to protect guns in military bases. This caused 57 of the 77 officers to threaten resignation over the movement. This incident became known as the Curragh Mutiny. This showed that the British government could do little against the paramilitary groups in Ulster, which in turn gave these groups a lot of confidence. On the night of the 24th to 25th of April 1914, militant Unionists led by Major Fred Crawford landed 25,000 rifles and 3 million rounds of ammunition at Larne in County Antrim. These weapons were swiftly distributed and concealed, some caches so well hidden that they have only come to light in the routine searches for weapons conducted by the British Army since 1969. The Larne gun running and the Curragh Mutiny convinced the Nationalist volunteers that they needed to arm themselves to protect the cause of Home Rule. 1,500 Mauser Model 1871 or Gewehr 71 rifles with 49,000 rounds of ammunition were purchased from Germany and transported to Howth Harbour by Erskine Childers on a yacht. The journey took 23 days, July 3rd to 26th. This was very successful for the Irish volunteers, with all the guns and ammunition being removed and transported away from the boat. However, when authorities in Dublin Castle heard of the guns, several police forces were sent to search for the guns, but they only managed to find a cache of 19. The day would end in tragedy when the King's Own Scottish borderers opened fire on an angry crowd who were pelting them with rotten fruit on Bachelor's Walk, leaving 3 civilians dead and 32 wounded, now known as the Bachelor's Walk Massacre. The day the Home Rule Bill was supposed to take effect, 18th of September 1914, an act was put in place to postpone the bill until the end of the war that had just broken out in Europe. Many Irish were content with this decision, but many others saw England's difficulty as Ireland's opportunity.